Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. GHSA is thrilled to partner with Verra Mobility, who is sponsoring today's discussion. We do appreciate their partnership very, very much. And I just have a couple of things to share with you before I bring on the folks who will be joining me today. So our goal for today's webinar is to showcase really the versatility and effectiveness of safety cameras. And you're going to hear me say that a lot. These are devices that are designed for safety, to address significant safety problems. So I'm not going to call it automated enforcement. They really are safety cameras. And we use them to address speeding, red light running, aggressive driving, behaviors that do put all road users at risk. And they have been used for decades. And research confirms that this technology, when it's used equitably, really can change behavior. It can prevent crashes, and most importantly, it can save lives. But we all know that there's still a great deal of resistance to widespread adoption of this proven countermeasure. So we are hopeful today that the webinar will help dispel some of the myths and the misconceptions about safety cameras. And we're also going to take some time to talk a little bit about the role of state highway safety offices and the role they can play in supporting transparent, data-driven programs. We're also going to hear from a survivor advocate who has been working diligently to move this technology forward. And we're also going to hear from a law enforcement official who's going to share his insights on what they're finding in their community. The focus here is on talking about best practices and lessons learned. And finally, I do want to point out that the U.S. Department of Transportation's recently released National Roadway Safety Strategy calls for the use of safety cameras to ensure safer speeds on our roadway. And I'm going to quote what the department says about this in the actual strategy. Automated speed enforcement safety cameras, if deployed equitably and applied appropriately to roads with the greatest risk of harm due to speeding, can provide significant safety benefits and save lives. So let me stop there. And I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and I've asked each of our speakers to share some of their insights with us. And then we're going to go into a discussion phase where I'm going to try to weave in your questions. So I want to reiterate what you heard at the start of the webinar, which is please put your questions in the questions box, and we'll try to get those addressed as quickly and as soon as we can. So first, I'd like to introduce Michael Tooker, who is Senior Vice President of Global Marketing and Product Solutions for Verra Mobility's Government Solutions business. And in that role, Michael oversees a portfolio of roadway safety and mobility solutions. And before he joined Verra Mobility, Michael spent 19 years of his career in the financial services industry, where he held a variety of customer-facing and corporate positions. And he also, right before he joined Verra Mobility, he served as development director for a nonprofit. And I've worked in nonprofits all my life, so thank you for that, Michael. It's very important work. So I want to thank you for joining us, and also, again, thank Verra Mobility's team for all the behind-the-scenes work that they've been doing to help us put this webinar together. And now I'm going to turn the virtual floor over to you.
Hey, thank you, Pam. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all of the fellow panelists that have joined me today. I think by nature of the variety of people that you have gathered today to talk to our audience, I think that's a good indication of what it takes to really build a successful program from a variety of different disciplines. And Pam, you had mentioned the word versatility in the description of the event and some of the things that we're going to focus on today. And I really want to kind of pull on that thread a little bit and talk about some of the specific kind of elements of versatility that these different automated enforcement solutions have. I think for people to really understand that they're not single-threaded. There's not just a single thing that automated devices can do. But one of the things that we talk a lot about, obviously, is safety. And when we talk about safety, one of the things that I really would like our audience to just think about is this notion of who are some of the most vulnerable populations in our communities, and how do we leverage this technology to protect them? Because ultimately, that's what we're really seeking to do, is protect vulnerable people in the communities that we serve. And that really depends on the specific use case that we're talking about. As an example, in red light camera, technology, there are vulnerable people that are going through intersections in vehicles. And that's a vulnerable moment if somebody runs that red light. As we all know, those can be, fatal and very devastating accidents. The other thing that when you think about speed enforcement, there's different populations that are vulnerable in different settings. We talk a lot about school zone speed. And so we know that in school zones, children that are going to and from school, parents that are walking their kids around school zones, those are vulnerable populations because obviously there's cars and unprotected individuals around those cars. And so that's a population that we really want to protect. And when we think about construction zones, that's another area that you'll hear more and more communities talking about is enforcement of speed in construction zones for the very same reason that those people in construction zones are in a very vulnerable situation. And I will say it's been interesting. I've spent some time on roadways for situations where we've been looking at deploying construction zone speed enforcement systems, and it's scary when you're standing out there on the edge and cars are whizzing by at 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. You get a real sense of the people that are out there in those environments and just how vulnerable they are. And so that's when we think about the versatility. There's versatility just within safety enforcement, and another application that we won't maybe talk as much about today, but it's obviously an important thing across the country is school bus stop arms, right? So you have again these children that are getting on and off the buses, and that's a very vulnerable moment, particularly in some of those areas where there's kind of densely populated areas with a lot of traffic. And so again, as people think about photo enforcement, really that's what we at Verra Mobility want our clients to be thinking about is who in your community is in a vulnerable situation, and how do we help to protect those individuals? And automated enforcement is simply one tool in the arsenal that municipalities have to keep them safe. But photo enforcement is actually much broader than just safety. I'll talk briefly, and I know the focus here is more around safety, but we're also finding more and more communities are using automated enforcement to improve mobility within their cities. As you think about the mass urbanization that's happening in the United States and across the globe, you have more and more people packed into areas where you don't have as many options in terms of re-engineering some of those roadways. And so the question is, how do you really use enforcement to optimize traffic flow? One of the most common applications is in bus lanes. And so that's an area where we see fixed cameras, mobile cameras that are moving around those ecosystems. Again, it's not as much a safety issue. Sometimes there is a combination of safety and mobility issues, but really in those bus lanes, it's really how do we help the bus schedules be more predictable? How do we increase ridership? How do we shorten commute times? And so that's really, again, ultimately making it easier to traverse around those different cities. There's another technology which a lot of people probably have not heard much about unless you spent time overseas, particularly in Europe or UK, is what we call block the box or yellow box enforcement. And that's where we look to monitor the intersections, not for red light running, but really for making sure that vehicles don't get stuck within those intersections as the lights change. Because as we all know, you get in some of these large cities during rush hour and you have gridlock, and it all stems from people going into that intersection at a time when either the light's red or it's yellow and they can't, they don't have clear egress out of the intersection. And so that's an area where we're really leveraging technology for mobility purposes. But interestingly, Seattle's a great example of a city that is leveraging that technology for dual purpose, partially for the issue of mobility. But we found that one of the most important goals and objectives that the city of Seattle has for their Block the Box program is really to protect people that are bicyclists, pedestrians, the disabled communities that are trying to use, for instance, wheelchairs and crosswalks, because they find that when there's gridlock and cars blocking crosswalks, again, it's very unsafe for people to be having to move outside of those crosswalks into traffic. And so I think what we're starting to see is really technology being leveraged for multiple purposes. Again, in this case, around safety as well as mobility concurrently. to just drive the objectives that those cities are seeking, which is ultimately, the way I like to describe it is make their cities more habitable. I think that's the ultimate outcome, is the communities that people don't feel safe, whether they're in their car or around school zones or getting on and off buses or in intersections and crosswalks. Again, there is a habitability question there. And so what we have seen is some more of our cities are in partnership to say, hey, we want our places to be attractive to people to come and live. We want to make them the streets safer. We want to make it easier to commute in and around. And so I think that's where photo enforcement has really expanded and become very versatile. Again, not as the answer, but just one answer or one solution in the arsenal that cities have to drive those outcomes. And I think another thing that we're finding, and I'm sure we'll probably have some questions around this. We saw some early ones. I think we do have one, is really around how do we leverage the data that these devices collect to ultimately yield insights that cities can find helpful to keeping those roadways safer and understanding where they have issues that they need to address. And so one of the most powerful things that Verra Mobility has in our arsenal is just what we call our platform. There's just obviously we process tens of millions of events and citations through that platform, but in the process we gain real insights into what's happening in those communities. And so oftentimes we work in partnership with our clients to just understand the questions they have, and then understand how can we leverage the data to bring them the insights that they're seeking. Sometimes it may be for traffic re-engineering purposes. Sometimes it may be for understanding certain times of day or days of the week where they have issues. It can even be around who are the most egregious offenders, because we're seeing more and more cities want to deal a little bit more directly with some of the people that are those chronic offenders that have multiple violations and really a bit of a dangerous nature. And so that's one thing that we've focused on as well. And the way I describe it is that it's really when you can couple the advancements with the edge technology with the capabilities in the back office, ultimately what we are able to deliver is what we consider to be the highest order of enforcement. And by that, what I mean is edge devices are very smart. They can see a lot and we can enforce a lot. But when you marry that up with data that you have on the back end, over time, you can start to see patterns and trends. And ultimately, I think as technology advances, that's a wonderful thing because there's more capabilities, the cost comes down. But I think if you live in a world where a camera can see everything and through algorithms you can teach it to enforce anything and everything, I don't think any of us want to live in a world where every single one of our decisions is enforced without any grace, let's say. And so I think that's where we can and do work with many of our clients to understand what is the type of environment you want to create. How do you deal with those most egregious offenders versus perhaps a one-time offender? And again, just really understanding as that technology advances, let's just be wise about how we institute policy so that ultimately, again, we're creating environments that are very habitable and people want to live and work and raise their families. So again, I'll maybe stop there because I could talk for days. I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to this stuff, but hopefully that gives our audience just a taste of some of the versatility, both within the world of safety as well as more broadly in the world of mobility and data and analytics. So I'll turn it back over to you, Pam.
Thanks so much, Michael. Really appreciate that. And we'll be back to you. We've got some questions. We have some things coming in from our audience, as well as some other discussion questions to share with you. And I want to just piggyback on something you said. I mean, traffic safety is really a quality of life issue. It's a public health issue. And so the use of this technology to help keep folks safe out there is what it's really all about. So we appreciate, your comments related to that. You may be familiar with the fact that the federal infrastructure bill that was signed into law late last fall has created new opportunities for expanding the use of safety camera programs in work and school zones. And I've asked my colleague, Russ Martin, GHSA's Senior Director of Policy and Government Relations, to take a few minutes to brief us on the federal policy and what it means specifically to state highway safety offices and their partners. And this is somewhat complicated, but I know Russ, he's good at this. He's going to break this down, simplify it for us. So Russ, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to talk about what's going on the federal level. Strictly speaking, the federal government doesn't regulate automated enforcement systems, but they have exerted control and influence over how federal funds might be used for these purposes. Looking back a little bit at the history, right now, the use of federal funds for automated enforcement generally remains banned, and that is a ban that was established in 2012 under the MAP 21 transportation reauthorization. And so we've had this ban for about 10 years now. When the FAST Act authorization came around in 2015, our state highway safety office members are probably familiar with the biennial automated enforcement survey that all states have been doing and continue to do. These are surveys of local automated enforcement programs, and I believe the results of all the surveys are available on NHTSA's website. We're very pleased to see certainly the survey requirement removed, but also some liberalization of federal policy related to automated enforcement within this new infrastructure bill that was just recently passed last fall. And I'll talk a little bit about what those changes were. Before I do that, I want to share a little bit of the flavor of the conversations that are happening in DC about automated enforcement. And it's still politically controversial, even though I think everyone accepts that these things are it's really effective at improving safety, but there's still a lot of concern about it. I think it tied a little bit to how the federal government thought about its role towards speeding. When we first began advocating for this most recent infrastructure bill 3 years ago, we were told point blank that speeding, that's not a federal issue, that's a state and local issue. But now everything's changed around. We have this change in policy related to automated enforcement. The National Roadway Safety Strategy prioritizes speeding as an area of focus. So there's some things that have changed, but some things don't change. I think just recently there was another bill introduced in Congress to ban automated enforcement or safety cameras nationwide. And of course that has a little chance of passing, but it just goes to show you that those attitudes are still out there. And when you ask them why, we hear a lot of the same things that all of you probably hear out on the state and local level, that it's just for revenue generation, or if it violates the rights of the offender. So these thoughts certainly trickle upwards. But we've been able to achieve this change. So what has changed now? So beginning in 2024, the use of NHTSA grant funds will be allowed for school and work zones for what they call automated enforcement. And it's important to clarify that automated enforcement in this case is strictly defined as speed enforcement and red light camera enforcement. So that doesn't include school bus safety cameras. It doesn't include toll enforcement or other kinds of safety camera applications. So it would just be for the use of for speeding and red light safety cameras in school and work zones. The other important detail is that any grant program that uses these, or any safety camera program that uses these grant funds, has to comply with federal guidance on this issue. We're looking to NHTSA to identify what that federal guidance is that states would have to comply with. For those of you that follow this issue and follow federal policy, you probably remember that there actually are two guidance documents that USDOT had promulgated many, many years ago. There is a guidance issued by NHTSA in 2005 on red light cameras, speed camera guidance issued by FHWA in 2008. Both of these resources are meant to be guidance about how you set up these programs and how to manage them and how you evaluate them. And so it's not really meant to be a minimum amount of requirements that might be necessary to be eligible for grant funds. On top of that, they're certainly aged, they're probably not up to date in the latest in safety camera policy, and they're also very long. The red light camera guidance is 62 pages, the speed camera guidance is 91 pages. So I don't think that's going to work for us. So what we've done at GHSA is we've advocated for NHTSA to draft new guidance that a program would have to meet, requirements that a program would have to meet in order to qualify for the use of these federal grant funds for automated enforcement or safety camera programs. The goal, I think, for everyone interested in advancing safety cameras on the federal level ought to be to try to work with NHTSA to establish whatever this guidance might be. And the name of the game here is going to be flexibility. It might be tempting to try and draft federal guidance that lays out in great detail everything about these programs, but I can tell you that from decades of experience from the State Highway Safety Office's working with NHTSA and working under NHTSA oversight is that the more requirements you have in any kind of federal rule or federal guidance, the less likely it is that a state or local government is going to be able to meet all of those rules. And at the end of the day, the programs just won't be implemented. And I don't think there are cities or states out there that would, at this stage, would be comfortable in investing in one of these programs just to have it all be shut down because of they violated some obscure technical requirement buried in some long piece of guidance. So we want to try and strike the right balance, establish something that is somewhat future-proof, and not get caught up on any technicalities moving forward. So on the state and local level, state highway safety offices are not permitted to lobby generally. Governor's reps can lobby or engage in lobbying activity in some circumstances, but there's generally a ban from the federal level on the use of federal funds for lobbying. That applies to many state highway safety offices, and it kind of hampers the ability of GHSA's members to change state policy in many cases. So lobbying in this case is defined as urging a lawmaker to take a specific action on, say, a piece of legislation or some other legislative matter. But advocacy, I think, is a little bit different. And what we've urged all of GHSA's members to do is to get more involved in advocacy, which is not necessarily related to any individual piece of legislation, but it's providing information, it's raising awareness, it's promoting the importance of safety and all the different countermeasures that are available to address different kinds of highway safety problems. Some common scenarios, state highway safety offices have been asked to submit information to the legislature about issues such as speeding, red light running, other kinds of issues that underpin safety camera applications. Some state highway safety offices have even been asked to come and testify before state legislatures in a more informational capacity. So there's definitely those connections. And then state highway safety offices can also advocate outside of the state house. They can go to meetings, they can go to events, they can promote the use of this technology generally, or talk about the underlying safety problems. I'm sure that the state highway safety offices can talk all day about speeding and how big of an issue that is and how many lives are lost unnecessarily to speeding and red light running for that matter. So the only general warning we would give our state highway safety office members as they go down that path is just be cognizant of the federal rule, but also be cognizant of state rules as well, because your state may have rules against activities your state highway safety office can engage in. And of course, your governor's administration may also have a clear sense of the extent to which they want you to engage. So just be mindful of all of that, but hopefully you can find opportunities to promote the use of safety camera programs. And as we work through this process here inside the Beltway to get regulations up and get guidance up and get everything up and running so that we can begin to tap into some of this new federal funding. And with that, I'm happy to address any questions.
Thanks, Russ. And we're going to put you on the spot in a little bit. So we'll got some questions for you. So thanks so much. Appreciate that. And it's really important to understand, the role of the State Highway Safety Office. There is an absolute role to play here. There is funding that's going to be available starting in fiscal year 2024. So we really need to understand how this all works. Our next speaker is Melissa Wandall, and I've got to tell you, she's a dear friend, and she's someone that absolutely inspires me every day. She's smiling. Melissa is president of the National Coalition for Safer Roads, and she's founder and president of the Mark Wandall Foundation, which does amazing work. Melissa successfully championed for use of safety cameras to address red light running in her home state of Florida, and is actively promoting their use nationwide through her work as not only a survivor advocate, but a Vision Zero proponent. And I've asked Melissa to briefly share with you what's involved in implementing a transparent program that is driven by safety. And she's gonna kick that off by talking about the program in Florida. So Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pam. I appreciate you so much. And it was just, one of the great things about this conversation today is exactly what Russ was talking about, the attitudes of automated enforcement as we see that, people are they want these bills to ban them. So if that's the case, and we're never going to get anywhere without our policymakers, we're never going to get to zero We all want to get to zero. So we must cultivate a robust, transparent program from the beginning so we can sustain that program to prevent crashes and save lives, because at the end of the day, that's what we're all doing, is we want to prevent crashes and save lives. So as an example, many know that my husband was killed by a red light runner. And so my way of trying to work through that and help people before they've made those decisions is the red light safety camera. How can it, along with law enforcement advocacy, engineering, education, that can save lives? And so in Florida, when we were putting together the Mark Wandall Traffic Safety Act, it was about a team. It was a team from Verra Mobility, the automated enforcement companies, because you have to find out, they are experts in their field. So you should ask them questions when you're dealing with any camera company. It's ask them because they're the experts. So you want to ask them those questions. Law enforcement, city officials, policymakers, we need to make sure that we are letting the policymakers know why these, the speed, red light, school bus, why they're so important, and why they save lives. And of course, advocacy, advocates, survivor advocates, victim advocates. You want to pull everybody together. It's a really huge team. So in Florida, we pulled together the Mark Wandall Traffic Safety Act, but we built that program. We worked with that. It took 5 years to pass that bill. It's not going to take 5 years to pass every bill, but it really did, because we wanted a good working program. We wanted money, $150 fine, and then, money, $10 per ticket goes to the 22 level 1 trauma centers in the state of Florida. $3 per ticket goes to the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis. So you not only want this good working program that you can sustain in your communities and in your state, but you also want the funding, because what does everybody talk about? Oh, all these cameras do is make money for the state or the municipality. But once you get into these programs, you realize that these programs are for safety, and a good working program shows that. And a great example is the Mark Wandall Traffic Safety Act in Florida that we continue to nurture and sustain, because that act passed in 2010. And every year it tries to be repealed, right? Because policymakers don't care for the red light cameras. But what we have is a really good working program that is saving lives. And when you cultivate those kind of programs, you can sustain your programs. So GHSA, along with AAA, Advocates for Auto and Highway Safety, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, and the National Safety Council have come up with a really great checklist. And it's a checklist that it assumes that you're already working, that you already have this program in your community that is legal. So it's just kind of like a step-by-step working program. And you can download this and take this with you. But I think it's really important to view, even though I talked about that this bill was already passed, it's really important whether you have a program now or whether you're in the process of trying to pass a bill, that you look at this program, because they really put together from step one, from the first step to basically you're just trying to identify your problems in your, where should these cameras go, right? Because what we don't want to do is we want to make sure that they're put in a place where they have to be, where they are needed, where people, the unfortunate part is, one of the things, reason why we have to put up automated enforcement is because people are passing, people are not obeying safety laws. And so unfortunately, we have to work on these. Fortunately, we have automated enforcement that can work to try to get people to stop. So if you look at this checklist, it's a little bit small for me to look at. So that's why I have to have my little specs on. They're for red light cameras and speed cameras only. So you can download this, you can look at this. If you have any questions, I know we have time in the end. You're gonna be able to ask us questions. Please take a few minutes just to look at it and download it, and then we can answer your questions on each each one of them, but you really want to go to these. There's first steps, there's the second steps, there's implementation steps, and then there's also long-term, because as I said from the beginning, you want a good working program so that you can sustain this in order to save lives in our communities.
Thank you, Melissa. This is really helpful. And I just want to reiterate, the checklist is readily available to folks. It really was a partnership effort. And I think what's important about this is it really does walk you through step by step what you need to do. Everything from looking at your data, other treatments that you you may have done to the roadway or the intersection, if it's red light cameras or if it's speeding problems and so forth. But there's these steps that you follow, and you can do this in a way by using this checklist that really can help build support for this. And it can address many of the arguments that you hear about this over and over again. And I know a couple of people have asked, why is there such, why is it so politically controversial? What's going on? And I think that's what we've tried to do with this checklist, is build it in a way that it really addresses all those questions and those issues that seem to kind of be roadblocks in this process. So, Melissa's right. This is a great tool. We definitely want to use this as much as possible. And I would encourage everyone, if you're not familiar with the legislation that's in place in Florida, again, this is a transparent program. They followed this, the checklist really to build this, and you continue to be able to make the case to sustain this. So thank you, Melissa, for your leadership on this.
You're welcome. Yes, and make sure that you can find between this checklist and between finding a great working program like the one in Florida, the Mark Wandall Traffic Safety Act. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask about those programs and how they work, because we all have to work together with these programs so people can understand why they are successful and they are saving lives. So this is a great checklist. So thank you very much, Pam.
You're welcome. So stand by, Melissa. We'll be getting back to you in a little bit. The last person I want to bring on camera today to speak with us, and then we're going to get into the discussion phase and some of your questions, is Captain Stephen Rao, who currently leads the Falls Church Police Department's Communications and Training Division. And Captain Rao, I learned, I live in New Jersey. Captain Rao was born and raised in New Jersey, but he's in Falls Church, Virginia, and he's held a number of positions with the department over his 33 years there. And in his current role, he serves as program administrator for Falls Church's video red light and school bus stop arm violation program. And people may not also realize that this is another use of the safety camera technology on school buses. So I also want to take a minute, Captain Rao, just to thank you for your 22 years of military service. And I will turn the floor over to you to talk a little bit about what you're learning and how you're using this technology in Falls Church.
Thank you, Pam. I'm not that old, 22 and 33. A lot of that was reserve time. So the most important thing, we've actually had a red light program in the city of Falls Church for upwards of 15 years. We currently, just to give you a little bit of demographics, it's a very small, we're a very small city, about 5 miles outside of Washington, D.C. And we currently have a red light camera program and a school bus stop arm program. During the implementation, when you're thinking of, if you're thinking about these programs, the most important thing is always to think about this is about traffic and pedestrian safety. That's your main concern. The vendors out there will assist you in identifying the more dangerous stretches of roadways and or intersections in which to put these in, put any type of photo enforcement in. But you always want to make sure that your main focus is traffic and pedestrian safety. As Russ was saying earlier, when you implement these programs, you want to make sure that you're following the letter of the law that your state that gives you permission to use photo enforcement. In the state of Virginia, we have to abide by state law. We just can't make up our own ordinances in Virginia. And you want to, we make sure that we abide strictly by what the state allows us to do. The integrity of the system as we go through, even on a daily basis, the integrity of my photo enforcement systems is key. If we ever get to the point where a judge or anything along those lines where we're questioning the integrity of the system, we're going to lose this valuable tool. So we're very cognizant of that. Okay. The other thing when it comes to photo enforcement is photo enforcement doesn't take the place of boots on the ground for officers out there that are conducting traffic enforcement. It's a tool. When you work in the traffic safety realm, okay, you have to take a holistic approach, and that includes having your dedicated traffic officers, okay, your patrol officers encouraged to go out there. The photo enforcement tools that are allowed. We are a very small jurisdiction, but we have our own independent school system. All of our school buses have stop arm cameras on there. And yet all of our officers know where the bus stops are for the children. And even though we have cameras, our officers are out there enforcing the stop arm program also. Same thing with the red lights. Even though they know where the intersections are with the red light cameras, if they see someone going through a red light at that intersection, they could still pull them over. They could still give them a ticket, and then the photo enforcement ticket would not apply. So just as a reminder that these do not, we just can't put them out there and forget about them and not have any type of enforcement out there. We need the traffic safety officers out there still enforcing the law. Okay. We've been, like I said, we've been very successful. Our numbers, we just to give you a kind of like an overview. I was looking at some of our numbers and from the data that I can collect from our system during our 2017, 2018, 2019, we had over 14 million cars go through these red lights, okay, or not violate the red lights, but go through the intersection, okay. So we can probably cut that in half because one's a mile down the road, but we're looking at anywhere between 8 and 10 million cars a year traversing through the city, and there are a lot of violations, okay, and we've had the violation trend has gone, it went down when the cameras were installed, and then they kind of sometimes they tick back up. During COVID, it was kind of strange, whereas the rate of violations went down as obviously the traffic on the roadway went down, but the average speed of the vehicles actually went up. Okay, so they were more egregious in their violations. Okay. It has helped us in a decline in crashes within the targeted intersections that we use. There are some other benefits. Now, first off, just to let you know, speed cameras that are allowed in the state of Virginia are for school zones and for highway work zones. Obviously the highway work zone would not apply to our small city. We just don't have we're not out there on the roadway fixing infrastructure, whereas the interstate or jurisdictions that have parkways and something along those lines might have. School zone cameras, we actually, most of our schools are tucked away back into the neighborhoods where we're actually not even, we're not engaging the school zone speed cameras because actually for us, we don't believe it's viable for us because a lot of the roads are not necessarily congested, but small enough that we don't have the speeding problems around the school zones, mostly just on our main arterials. We are still monitoring that issue to see if it will be needed, just to let everyone know. One of the beautiful things about the speed cameras, because you have to put up signs, or not the speed cameras, the red light cameras, you have to put up signs. Everybody knows where they are, and it actually does help with compliance. Okay. One of the things I do want to talk about is there are some additional benefits that we have for our red light cameras. They actually, the system that we use, they actually record all the time with an overview of the intersection, not necessarily the minutia of the license plates. They capture the license plate data on violators, but we also get an overview, and we've been able to use that to investigate actually criminal offenses, other traffic-related offenses of a cross traffic crash where the camera perspective has the person on a green light, so it wouldn't show up as a violation. And we've been able to use that numerous times. Now, we just can't access that data because it is protected, but there are court procedures where we can actually get that data, get videos of the raw footage that we use. You can also, in the system we use, you can actually also bring the cameras up live, and that's really good when it has to, if you have special events, okay? If you have any civil disturbances or anything like that, you can actually bring those cameras up live and view them live. So those are just very briefly, we've been very successful. The community is appreciative of all of our efforts with this. And that was another key component, is making sure that you are advertising this to the community and get the buy-in.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Really, really helpful. And I think it's important to note that, as you heard Michael say at the top of the conversation today, that this technology has many, many uses. And you heard what Michael talked about in terms of data collection, how it can be used to help with quality of life issues, transportation issues. You heard Stephen talk about, obviously, it can be used for other investigations related to safety. So I'm going to ask all of our folks that have been with us so far, our panelists, to go ahead and turn their cameras on and their microphones, because I have questions. Been getting some great questions from folks out there. There's Stephen, great. Okay, Russ is on, everybody's there. So Stephen, I'm gonna start with you real quickly and just ask, one of the folks asked the question, do you see, and Michael, you might be able to jump in on this as well, do you see camera-based violation, any particular types, growing faster than others? Speeding versus red light running versus, school bus stop arm violations. What are we seeing out there? Folks are interested in that.
From my observation, it does not appear to be growing. It appears to be more stable. Okay, like I said, there are COVID was really weird because with less traffic on the road, cars are actually going faster. Okay, so it's a little bit. I will say it's a little bit difficult in the area where I'm at, is because there's a lot of transient movement within the area. People move in, people move out. Mm-hmm. Okay, but I see that as a help. Okay, that I see the trends as we go with the photo enforcement. I see actually more complaints.
Okay, great. Michael, what have you been seeing? I mean, clearly we know during the pandemic we've seen this huge uptick in high rates of speed, and so talk a little bit about what you all have been seeing.
Yeah, that was probably the most pronounced trend that we saw during the pandemic, and every municipality had a slightly different variation to it. I mean, there were some of the larger municipal areas that I know one of our clients actually said they saw more motorcycles and Ferraris and Lamborghinis out on the streets than prior to the pandemic, because the roads were open and people wanted to go out and race their cars and motorcycles. So in some cases we saw that. In some cases we did see some heightened speeds around school zones, because many schools were not in session. And so they may have, depending on the statute, sometimes they still enforce during school hours, or sometimes, not, depending on the laws. But but we did see some heightened speed in school zones, which obviously is a big concern. And then I think maybe the other one is not so much a trend, broadly, but because we're seeing more programs deployed, particularly around school zones, we're seeing just more insights around some of those different types of speed. But to Captain Rao's point, not necessarily a heightened numbers of violations. We just have more visibility to it because we have more clients that are enabling programs, and they're starting to just pick up the insights and understand what are some of the patterns. And then one of the things that I think we're seeing again, which is more a function of some of the data and insights, is as some municipalities stand up multiple programs, you start to see there are people out there that are more of those egregious chronic offenders, where you start to see, hey, they have a speed ticket, they have a red light running ticket, and a crossing guard ticket, and so you see maybe some patterns starting to emerge that people that are breaking the laws on the roads are not. It's not just a speed infraction or just a red light runner, but you see that across all types of enforcement. You're just seeing again some of those egregious offenders starting to surface, particularly in those municipalities that are more keenly attuned to that, because that, I would say, that's a trend that we're seeing. Is we're getting more questions from our clients to say, hey, can you do more in the area of trying to surface some of those people that are multiple offenders, egregious offenders across different types of infractions? So those are maybe some of the things that we're starting to see right now.
Sure, no, that's helpful. I want to talk for a minute, get this in because it was raised again from folks out there in our audience, talking about how can safety cameras be implemented equitably. A lot of discussion about equitable enforcement, making sure that we're doing this appropriately. So looking at this from the standpoint of, what makes sense? What are those best practices for where we place the cameras? And one individual had brought up the issue of, we want to make sure that we're not over surveilling in communities that have traditionally been, it's been an issue with where that's happening. Russ, can you talk a little bit about, the equitable component of this?
Absolutely. So I could talk about this for hours, but I think the bottom line is that you're going to want to make sure you have your bases covered. You start with the data about where the problem is, so you can always fall back on, well, we're doing this because this is the outcome that we're seeing. And then I think an important part of implementing any kind of highway safety program, it's not even all safety cameras, it could be anything, to implement something in a more equitable way is to involve the community more in the planning of that. So whatever it is, if it's safety cameras, if it's seat belts, if it's teen driver safety, go out to the community and meet with the folks in that community and tell them what you're seeing and find out what they think about what you think ought to be done, what they think ought to be done. That goes quite a while to make sure you have that base covered. Then you can always go back and collect more data to find out whether there are inequitable disparities in an enforcement program. A lot of states, a lot of communities are beginning to collect data and analyze that data about enforcement activity to try and find patterns. And sometimes the patterns only emerge in the data. And that's an opportunity to go and take a closer look at that program and see maybe there's something going on that is inequitable and maybe we can fix it.
Absolutely. Melissa, did you want to jump in here? I saw you shaking your head.
I do. I could jump through the computer and see everybody. So what I really believe in with this is I think that we do not do ourselves any service whatsoever in this industry when we don't go out into the communities and let them know, like Russ said, what we're doing and why we're doing it. These safety cameras or any campaign we do, we're not doing it to catch people, right? We're not telling people they have to wear a seatbelt. We want you to be pulled over if you don't wear a seatbelt because we just don't like you, right? We don't want to tell people that we're putting up a red light safety camera because we want to catch you doing something wrong. A lot of the times, sometimes it's the people in the community, sometimes it's not, but we need to go in, we need to educate our policymakers, if we already have a bill, to go to these town hall meetings, to let them know why it's so important. We need to engage with these communities and let them know that we are there implementing programs because we want to save their lives. It's not about hurting them, it's about keeping them safe. And I just think that we can do better.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point, and it gets addressed in the checklist, is that this has to be something that is data driven and that the community is engaged in this discussion. And when you see the numbers coming down, it may mean moving the cameras. It may mean that they don't need to be there anymore. They need to be someplace else. So I think, that's important. And another person in our audience brought up the issue of, well, if we put these cameras in place, shouldn't we be addressing infrastructure first? Is this being done in lieu of maybe infrastructure improvements that are needed? And I can speak to this for a second, but I want others to jump in here. And we say very clearly on the checklist that you should be looking at all types of solutions. You should be looking at, are there infrastructure improvements that can be made? If it's red light camera issues, should you be checking, check the signal timing, look at all those different issues. So we don't say that you should be sacrificing one for the other. We should be looking at all viable solutions. So anybody else want to jump in here and answer that as well, speak to that?
I would just maybe affirm what you shared, Pam. Excuse me, Russ. Just real quick, just affirm what you said there, Pam, which is photo enforcement is not the answer to everything. And to Russ's point too is let's start with the data and let's understand the way we describe it at Verra Mobility is we seek to meet our clients at their highest point of need. And so the first thing is just to sit down to Russ's point and have a conversation about what are the needs that you have, what are the outcomes that you're seeking, what is the data that you have at your disposal, and what does it tell you? And maybe a good example would be in many states where they're enabling school zone speed legislation, one of the first steps is to conduct speed studies to really understand, do you have a problem there? Before we start to deploy the technology, let's make sure that we actually have a vulnerable, let's say we know we have a vulnerable population that we want to protect, but we don't know if that's actually a troubled area where we have higher incidence of speed or whatnot. So again, it's really start with the data, and try to understand the outcomes. And then what are the different tools they have in their arsenal to try to drive the changes that they're seeking. And it may or may not be enforcement. There may be other better ways to modify behavior.
Absolutely. Russ, you want to jump in?
I would only add that automated enforcement can sometimes be a bridge. So like if you do a study and there's an intersection or a section of roadway where there are a lot of great ideas for infrastructure changes we can make, but it might take some time to get the capital together and draw up the plans and actually carry out the project. In the meantime, maybe automated enforcement is something you can put there to hopefully do something about the safety problem. I think at the end of the day, if we can hard code safety interventions into the roadway, that helps all of us, because I think the best violation is one that had never occurred in the first place. And that's kind of where we want to eventually get to.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's the bottom line for sure. Let me shift gears for a second. Had a bunch of questions from folks asking about, why is this so hard to get through legislators? Why is it so hard to get state highway administrators on board with this? What's the challenge? And I know in New Jersey, we had a 5-year red light running pilot program. I actually did some consulting work and saw that it was doing good things. The numbers were coming down and the plug got pulled. What can I say? It was very frustrating to me and frustrating to our 25 communities where we had this technology and it was working. And so folks want to know, I mean, how do we change this dynamic? And I would point obviously to the checklist as a great tool. But folks were asking about, what do you do? Because there are roadblocks here. And, who are those key folks in states you should be tapping to try to move this forward, to get adoption? Who wants to start this? Who wants to take this one on? Melissa, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll just take a little bit and then you can let the experts talk about it. But it's really, if there are survivor advocates and victim advocates, it's really important because a lot of them around this country really want to step out and use their voice and get to the policymakers. Because at the end of the day, it really takes that advocacy, because our policymakers are they have so many things that they need to pay attention to every day, that if they do not like them for some reason, whether they have gotten tickets from them or they say their constituents don't like them, they're not going to listen. They don't want to know how they work. They don't want to know that we've implemented a checklist that works well, that they don't want to know that these are a safety net, because because people are breaking safety laws. So I think it's really important that we work together from the experts in the field to those advocates. There's a lot of people out there just like me that can utilize their voice and want to share their stories with policymakers. And so we really need to reach out into our communities. Let them come to you though. Don't read in the paper that somebody has been in a crash and then you call them up and try to get them to legislate. We don't do that. But we try to get those people that are using their voices and bring them in and help them to advocate for these safety devices so that we can save lives.
Anyone else want to take that one on?
I might just add, I mean, I think that probably merits a panel of its own, right? I mean, we could have a real lengthy discussion on that and have some, you know,
maybe part two.
variety of different, but maybe part two. But I think, you know, in our roots, our American Traffic Solutions has become Verra Mobility, and we're 37 years old, let's say. And so I would say endurance is just an important attribute, is that we, you know, we can't take those, the detractors, we can't take their criticism personally. We can't let it, you know, demoralize us or stop us. Really, we just have to do some of our corporate values, which I think are really helpful for guiding us. One is do what's right. Another is own it. The third is lead with grace, and fourth is win together. And so if I think about how those work together, that for us is kind of a microcosm of how we approach the market, because we can't, as we said early on, is we have to do it together, because it takes a lot of different parties coming together and being unified in that voice and that advocacy. Another is that we have to do what's right. And although some people may say it doesn't work, what we know is that it does work. We're all drivers, and we know that when there are enforcement cameras around, we all know that we drive differently, because we know that there's a heightened level of enforcement. And so we drive more cautiously. We drive at lower speeds. We're more cautious around intersections. I mean, I can speak when I send my kids out the door every day, they're sick and tired of my wife and I saying, watch out for red light runners and speeders and don't pass school buses. It's just something that we just have to have endurance and just continue to fight a noble fight and do it graciously, so that we're not, you know, offending or you know, losing those of us in our audience that are in favor and in harness with us. Let's just continue to advance and not take it personally when we run into adversity.
Absolutely. Stephen, is there a secret sauce for what you all were able to do in Falls Church? I think Stephen's camera may have frozen.
Oh, if there was a secret sauce that he, how's that?
You're okay, go
Better?
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, here's a secret sauce. I wasn't the administrator when we put it all together. Our problem in Virginia is I don't want to say a problem, but it's the way the state law is set up, that you have to get the state legislature to approve anything that the localities can do. So I think it hits on what Melissa said first, is that the law enforcement agencies are not going to be the tip of the spear for the advocacy in this. We like it, okay, but I think that your state legislatures and even your local legislators, they're going to listen to the advocates. They're going to listen to the citizens, and those they're the people that are going to drive it with the assistance of law enforcement. I think that as much as law enforcement liked the idea of the red light cameras, we had the same thing where we had a 5 or an 8 year sunset provision in the first iteration of the red light cameras. Okay, and then we, you know, basically the citizens and the advocates and law enforcement had to fight for another 5 or 6 years to get them back. Okay, so a lot of it is advocacy. You know, use the dirty L word, lobbying. You know, and to get this stuff done.
Okay. Well, I hate to say this, but we've about hit the top of the hour, and I want to share, there's lots of questions. I want to let our audience out there know that we're hearing you. One person asked if we could have contact info from the experts here that they say we might pull in to consult with us and build a plan to move toward automated enforcement in our own area. Yes, Denise, we will share contact information for folks. And if there's questions that we were not able to get to today, and there were some, we will definitely circle back with our panelists and get responses for all of you. Absolutely, because there's some really good questions, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. We do need a part 2. Michael's right. We need a part 2 on this for sure. So I really want to say, first of all, thank you to Melissa, to Michael, to Stephen, to Russ for sharing your insights and your expertise with us today. As a reminder, you can find the automated enforcement checklist. There's a link here. There's also, it's on our GHSA website under the speeding tab in the issues section on our website. Michael, I want to thank you and your colleagues for their partnership and bringing us this webinar today. Really, really important. And also I want to thank the audience. Thank you for tuning in, for being interested in this topic. It really is important that we all work together to advance the use of technology in the right way. Transparent, data-driven, equitable programs is really what it's all about. And it shouldn't be about sacrificing one countermeasure for another. We need to look at all the countermeasures and have the data help us figure out what makes the most sense. So I want to wish everybody a great afternoon. Please be on the lookout for an email from GHSA tomorrow asking for your feedback on today's webinar. So with that, I will say thank you and goodbye, and everyone have a wonderful and safe afternoon. Take care.